laden with cold meats, game pie, probably pheasant, because they would have been shooting after all over the weekend.
Lot of pheasant.
Lot of pheasant,
and
yes.
Devilled pheasant legs, delicious for breakfast.
The main dining table would have had freshly prepared food, different ways of cooked eggs, fish. There would have been lots of different sorts of breads and also, of course, tea, coffee and also hot chocolate.
Why did people come here in particular? Because this was a winter house, wasn't it?
It was a winter house. The family were staying in their other houses at different times of the year. They came to Chatsworth from October through probably until February. And so it would have been an opportunity, really, to gather their friends and acquaintances together, to go shooting, to show what Chatsworth had to offer. And part of that was the lavishness of the breakfast table.
And you've got a family association with Chatsworth?
Yes, I have. My grandmother was the youngest of 11 children born at Beeley, which is about 3 miles away, and her mother, my great-grandmother, used to come and help out in the kitchens when they were really busy at this kind of fabulous house party that we're talking about.
We had a cook when I was growing up who had trained at Chatsworth, and this was regarded as being a very good reference because the amount of experience she would have had training here. And she was a very good cook. I owe it all to her, really.
But despite all the sumptuousness on offer, if you were a lady, you might prefer to start the day with breakfast in bed.
Just coming now into the Wellington bedroom, which was named in honour of the Duke of Wellington, who was one of the many guests that came to stay. Fabulous room, isn't it?
Fantastic. I mean, the wallpaper is just stunning.
It is. Hand-painted Chinese wallpaper. And then wonderful bed here where the lady's maid would have brought her mistress tea and toast in bed.
And of course, breakfast is the one meal of the day a lady can still eat in bed without being thought of as slovenly.
What's through there?
We've got the dressing room through here, and this is where the gentleman would have slept if he'd had a late night at cards. Rather than come in and disturb his wife, he would have slept in the smaller bed in here.
Is late at cards or perhaps sleeping in somebody else's room?
Oh, well, I wouldn't like to say.
There were a lot of corridor
sure
creeping, I think.
If the Chatsworth corridors did creak, they must have been at their noisiest in the days when the notorious Marlborough House set and the future King Edward VII were frequent guests. Hannah Obi is the curator at Chatsworth, and she's been making a study of the social life of the house.
Althorpe,
yes.
Earl Spencer.
Yeah, exactly.
Chatsworth, of course, was famous for country house parties with country house breakfasts as part and parcel of the celebrations. But tell me a bit more about the parties.
The parties, I think, really took off in the 8th Duke's time, but towards the end of his life, because he had this 30-year love affair with Louise, who was Duchess of Manchester, and after her husband died, they got married, and she brings all these amazing people up from London and had these incredible house parties. So it really is the high point of Edwardian high-octane glamour.
I like that. High-octane glamour. What have we got here?
So what we've actually got here is an illustration from 1901 when there was a house party for Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, but also present was his mistress, Mrs. Keppel. You've got the 8th Duke of Devonshire, and you've also got his new wife, Louise, or Lottie as she was known. So she and Mrs. Keppel are flanking Edward VII.
One of Edward VII's favourite breakfasts, and I don't know if he had it here, was you hollowed out an onion. You boiled an onion and hollowed it out and then filled it with a dish of chicken livers cooked in cream and brandy. Put it back in the onion, put the lid on, just gave it a little longer in the oven, and then he would have that for breakfast.
I just can't imagine having that for breakfast. But then, when you think about how many pheasants he was going out to shoot when he left at about 10 o'clock in the morning, that might actually make a bit of sense. We've got a wonderful photograph of him just on the back of a pony, sort of going over the moors, looking very, very heavy going, I think it was. Yeah, so maybe that's why he needed a good breakfast in the country, but I'm not sure so much in London what his excuse would have been.
I think gluttony.
All the same, Edward VII's hugely indulgent breakfast was very much in keeping with the spirit of the age. A recommended menu for a large party would typically have more than 24 hot and cold dishes, including such delights as eggs in aspic, cookie of shrimp, hashed venison, and broiled pigeons. I've chosen a very particular Victorian breakfast speciality, and I'm going to ask Chatsworth's current head chef, Dan Brazil, to cook it for me.
Hello, you must be Daniel.
Hello.
Hello. I've got a chore for you.
OK.
I have here a rather strange book by an anonymous Victorian gentleman called Major L, and he gives breakfasts for large parties for the month of August. Kidneys, lobster, and a sole Colbert.
Ah, sole à la Colbert.
In Francatelli, chef to Queen Victoria, he gives a recipe for sole à la Colbert, which is sole fried, and then you take the bone out, stuff it with maître d'hôtel butter, pour over some maître d'hôtel sauce.
Seems like a lot of butter for breakfast, so...
Well, over to you. Do you not have a cooked breakfast?
I very rarely have time for a cooked breakfast these days. I don't think many people do. Maybe a treat on a weekend, on a Sunday, or perhaps the birthday if the wife's feeling generous. So I've got some seasoned flour here.
So you've rubbed it over with flour, and you're painting it with the beaten egg.
We're using lemon sole today. I'd imagine that Queen Victoria would have had Dover sole.
And then you're going to dip it in some breadcrumbs, fry it in very hot lard or frying fat to swim it.
So swimming in fat.
He says cook it until it's well done. I mean, I wouldn't cook a fish until it was well done. When done, cleverly, we're relying on you to be cleverly, remove the backbone without deforming the fish. Coming. Look at that. I'm most impressed.
Finally, we're told to fill the fish with 2 ounces of maître d'hôtel butter. That's butter with chopped parsley and onion. And then serve it with maître d'hôtel sauce, a white sauce made with another 2 ounces of butter.
Sole à la Colbert.
Amazing. Extraordinary to think they ate that for breakfast. You'd have a heart attack by lunchtime. Very nice, but not, I think, for breakfast.
Yes, I think as a dinner dish it's very nice, but for breakfast, not for me.
Nor me neither.
And in case you're wondering, a dish of sole à la Colbert comes in at a little over 1,800 calories. The perfect start for a day on the moors?
Well done.
In the meantime, throughout the 19th century, our cities were growing and a new middle class was emerging. They may not have had country estates, but they did want a few luxuries to go with their bacon and eggs, and so they went shopping. And there was one establishment that prided itself on knowing exactly what the right sort of person should have on their breakfast table. Fortnum & Mason was founded by a former royal footman in 1707, but by the 19th century it was providing the newly rich with access to goods that had once been the preserve of the gentry, as the store's archivist Andrea Tanner explained to me.
It's lovely to be here again. I spent a lot of my childhood coming around Fortnum's with my mother. Thank you very much. When I was a child, Fortnum's was a great place if you needed it for pointing you in the right direction.
Yes, I think the shop has always had an educative role. When the shop began, its customers were only the aristocracy and the landed gentry. But, you know, the British Empire grew, people became more prosperous, and those who had a bit of money and now had a bit of leisure wanted to have what the aristocracy had. They wanted to know the right thing to eat, the right thing to wear, the right thing to say. So the sort of thing that Fortnum's would do would be, you know, if someone wants to know what does the Duke of Grafton, what sort of tea does he have, gently you would be directed towards a suitable sort of tea, a suitable blend of coffee, particular made-up dishes for breakfast, because we had an enormous department where if you weren't up to making your veal patties and croquettes and so on, we would make them for you and get them to you in plenty of time for breakfast.
But even when I was young, and when you came to Fortnum's, it wasn't like this. You didn't handle things.
No, you weren't allowed to touch anything. Heaven forfend. You were met at the door by a gentleman in a frock coat who would bow to you, and he had a little notebook, would determine your name if he didn't know who you were, and determine what you would like to buy, and then he would lead you round and make suggestions to you, but you weren't allowed to actually touch anything. You were allowed to taste things, but no. And then, of course, no money passed hands at Fortnum's in those days. Everything was on account, so you got to enjoy the goods a good month or two before you actually paid for them.
Another thing you would definitely want for your breakfast table was marmalade, a delicacy which was probably first brought to this country in the 1660s by one of my great heroines, the Portuguese Princess Catherine of Braganza, when she married Charles II.
Wonderful sight.
This is our oldest marmalade, which is Burlington breakfast marmalade. You can see the peel in there, and this was made for the first Earl of Burlington and made to a recipe that actually was his chef's recipe. So we were given the recipe in the 1730s.
Have you always sort of made marmalade and sold it?
No, we haven't. It wouldn't have occurred to us to make marmalade because our customers had staff who made homemade marmalade. But we would have sold them the sugar and also the citrus fruits to make it.
That's brilliant, I love that.
But it was really the First World War and the demands of the Western Front. That's when we started making our own marmalade. But we didn't put them in jars, we put them in tins because it was much safer to send it out to the officers.
Used to send to my father. I had letters, you know, would say things like, oh, I need some more marmalade, or that fruitcake was particularly good, you know, that Fortnum's one. Can you send me another one?
Excellent. Well, he was in good company because Clemmy used to send Winston Churchill marmalade from Fortnum's during the First World War.
Throughout the Victorian and Edwardian eras, the country house breakfast was the model of early morning refinement, and the Victorians, in particular, kept on inventing and adapting new dishes. Andrea and I are going to sample two of the best known.
Thank you very much.
Of course, everybody thinks that kippers are really old, that it's an old method of curing fish.
Yes, it almost looks medieval, but it's a 19th century English invention, yes.
1861 in Craster. Today we smoked herring in the way in which the Scots smoke salmon.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Right. So it's, 150 years old? Mm-hmm. That's it. But very delicious.
Very delicious, and of course now very much associated with breakfast.
Indeed, indeed.
Much older on the table would be what I'm having, which is kedgeree.
Yes, it's a very ancient dish. It was originally the preferred breakfast of the poor in India, made up of just rice and lentils. It was taken up by the Mughal emperors during their fasting period, when they had it for breakfast too, and they were the people who first added fish to it.
But of course it was those intrepid officers who set off to build the British Empire who brought the recipe for kedgeree back to their breakfast tables at home.
So you've got this coming back from India as early as the 18th century.
Yes, but of course you've got smoked haddock in your kedgeree, and that is a Victorian introduction. The fish in India was never smoked, it was always fresh. But by the time kedgeree became part of the great British country house breakfast, smoked haddock became absolutely de rigueur. You could not use another form of fish, or it wasn't a proper kedgeree.
Really? And the lentils had long since
gone?
gone.
They had long since gone. I think the lentils disappeared on the boat coming from India to Tilbury.
So it was a combination of staple foods, aristocratic customs and imported influences that gave rise to the rich and varied traditions of our morning meal. But then, just as the culinary crescendo of the English breakfast reached its climax at the end of the 19th century, from over in America came the first rumblings of a revolution that would make the country house breakfast history. The man in the hat is Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. His name is synonymous with the best-known breakfast cereal in the world, although it was not the first. Today, cornflakes of all brands are a breakfast staple, but they were conceived as part of a much grander scheme to convert us all to vegetarianism. Dr. Kellogg pursued this aim with evangelical fervour because he was a member of an energetic new Christian church, the Seventh-day Adventists, who interpreted passages from the book of Genesis as an instruction from God that mankind should not eat meat. Like many of history's most important moments, the invention of the cornflake in 1894 was an accident. And it's one I'm going to see recreated here in Leeds at the University's School of Food Science and Nutrition. Dr. Kellogg and his brother Will had been working with wheat rather than corn, and these three young students, Callum, Zach and Charlotte, are going to repeat the experiment for me.
So, Callum, what have we got here?
This is the raw wheat grain, which John Harvey Kellogg actually made his first flake from. Everybody knows he was famous for using corn, but his first experiments were with wheat.
It's quite hard.
It is very hard, and in its raw form, you can't really do much with it with regards to eating.
And so this is it soaking, is it?
Yes, it is. The grain will take up some water, and it will hydrolyse some of the starch and soften it a little bit. And this is typically kept at approximately 5 to 15 degrees overnight.
After soaking the wheat grain, the Kellogg brothers boiled it for 1 hour. And then they dried it again, which is where Zach takes over.
And how does this dry them?
Hot air just passes over the top of them, and that just helps remove some of the excess moisture that you've got built up on the surface.
So it's a giant hairdryer, really.
It is a giant hairdryer. Initially, one of the problems faced by the Kellogg brothers when they were producing the first wheat flakes was that if there was too much moisture, when they put them through the roller, it just smushed into a horrible mass and a bit of a sludge. And if they're too dry after this, if we dry them too much, then when you roll them through, they'll just crack like hard bits of rice.
Oh, really?
So we'll just pop the dryer on now.
The Kellogg brothers didn't have a hairdryer, naturally, and they struggled to get their grain to the right consistency. Until, that is, they accidentally left a batch standing for several hours. By the time the brothers noticed their mistake, the grains were mouldy, but they were also the perfect consistency for rolling into flakes, as these are now.
Now we've laid them all out on the sheet, it's just time to cover them over and then pass them through the roller.
And that's my job.
Just goes round and
Just
through.
like an old-fashioned mangle.
Yeah.
Look at that.
A couple of them have merged into each other.
Doesn't
but
look
that
a
gives
lot like cornflakes. So, Charlotte, you've got the flakes here, beautifully rolled by me.
Yes, very well done.
What are you going to do now?
Lay it on a baking tray, and that's what I'm going to be doing right now. Takes a lot of patience, actually.
Extraordinary. You'd think by this stage they'd have given up, really. And how long do you bake them for?
about 15 to 20 minutes.
Now remember, the first batch of wheat the Kellogg brothers rolled was mouldy, but they soon developed their own drying technique to produce edible flakes.
All right, looks like we've got a full tray ready to be popped into the oven. All right, so these are nice and warm right out of the oven. If you would like to give a taste.
It doesn't taste all that wonderful.
It doesn't really look something like you want to have for breakfast, does it? And so, after a range of experiments, we found out that if we mashed up the wheat grains and we chop it up to break up the husk a bit more, and we roll it up, follow the same procedure as before, and with that, we end up with the end result of this.
That's much better, isn't it?
Yes, it
visually.
is.
It actually tastes considerably better. How extraordinary. Well done.
Thank you.
That's fascinating.
So that's how they were invented, but it doesn't explain why Dr. Kellogg's cornflakes became so popular.
This is the 10 gates of digestion.
I've come to meet another doctor.
Without saying constipation once, which is a real...
Dr. Cowrie O'Connor is a historian from University College London. She grew up eating Kellogg's cereals, and she has a very full knowledge of the man behind them.
John Harvey Kellogg, Victorian obsessive. Cornflakes was where he kicked off, was it?
No, he started back with grains of all kinds because the Seventh-day Adventist belief was God's own food, was grain, vegetables, nuts. So
nuts being the obvious word.
Yes, indeed so. He invented peanut butter while he was at it. He was a very, very innovative and inventive man. But mainly, he was trying to save America through a change of diet. So he wanted to invent all sorts of grain-based foods. And he was particularly challenged by breakfast because it was the beginning of the day and the beginning of the digestive cycle. And he wrote a wonderful book called The Itinerary of a Breakfast, where he charts breakfast as it goes through the 10 gates of the body and exits. And he thought that nature should provide the perfect laxative in the way of grain. So from the beginning, he was always trying to develop good grain-based ways to start the day.
But the Victorians were completely obsessed with their bowels and constipation and regularity. It was the thing of the age.
Well, absolutely, and he prime among them. He also began to think that oatmeal porridge, cooked porridge, which was the great Victorian standby, was no good because it gets stuck on its way through the 10 gates of the body. So what was really needed was something that was quick, easy, and cold.
The testing ground for the cornflakes recipe that Dr. Kellogg and his brother devised was the Sanitarium, a health spa in Michigan that the doctor managed. It was the guests here who were the first to try the original cornflake in 1895.
So this is the foundation of the Kellogg's empire. These golden flakes of corn, very, very light. Now, when they first did the cornflakes, they were slightly tasteless. So one day, when the doctor was on a trip, the brother decided to improve on the recipe by adding malt and sugar to the flavoring. This is the cornflake we have now, transformed it, instant success, but the doctor never ever wanted to sell any of these cereals. He just wanted to let them be for the people in the sanitarium and do them by mail order. And the brother said, "My God, we could make a fortune. Why don't we sell them to the world?" And they fell out.
The decision to sell cornflakes as a product drove a wedge between the two Kellogg brothers. It was the younger one, Will Keith, who founded the cereal company in 1906 and became a multi-millionaire. The principle of adding sugar to cereals to stop them tasting like horse food, as Will Kay once said, created a breakfast bandwagon. The doctor's idea of an unadulterated grain-based meal was transformed into a whole range of products, some of which the Kellogg Company found could be marketed very effectively to children.
And this is their masterstroke. Frosties. Yes, with Tony the Tiger. One of the most iconic characters ever created for anything. The king of the breakfast table.
Great.
Right, that's it. Compare this, which is a sugar-covered cornflake, to the standard cornflake. Well, this is twice as heavy.
Yeah.
It must be the sugar, but there we are.
And the child is going to want to rush for the sugar.
Absolutely.
Sugar Frosted Flakes, as they were known in America, were launched in 1952, but the sweetening of cereals didn't stop there. 6 years later, an even more tempting, child-friendly product appeared.
Cocoa Pops. So you not only have something that's sugared, but you have it with cocoa. And then you put on milk and it turns into chocolate milk. I mean, who can resist that? And think of what the doctor is saying by this time, spinning in his grave like a turbine, I should think.
I don't know that I agree with the doctor's prognosis that everyone would benefit from a grain-based laxative. All the same, even though there's less sugar in many Kellogg cereals now than there used to be, I have to say a sweetened cereal for breakfast isn't for me. I've come finally to a place where almost every conceivable kind of morning meal is on offer, the hotel breakfast room. I'm meeting writer Tom Parker Bowles, a food lover after my own heart.
Morning, Professor.
Ah, Tom, how are you? Lovely to see you.
Right. Breakfast.
Absolutely. Yes.
Am I looking at your one?
There. You have that one.
I've asked Tom to join me to reflect on what has happened to our idea of an English breakfast.
Duck eggs for the soldiers.
Thank you very much.
Bacon and eggs, sir. Thank you very much. Welcome, sir.
So very traditional, Tom, bacon and eggs.
I think bacon and eggs is one of the great breakfast combinations of all time. Pig and egg. Sublime. And it's the, bacon is a great British art, isn't it?
What was that lovely thing? The hen is involved, but the pig is totally committed.
But this is a proper breakfast. It provides you with... admittedly, I'm not off now to go and work the fields or go down the mine or anything particularly physical. But this, to start a day with a breakfast like this, puts you in a good mood. Whenever I go away and stay at a hotel, I always have the full English because it's something quite wonderful and glorious.
And do you think when people go to hotels, even people who don't normally eat breakfast, that they'll have breakfast?
Yes, it is. It's luxury to have breakfast now, I think, to have a cooked breakfast. If you're obsessed with fats and meats and all that sort of stuff, well, you're not going to get any pleasure out of anything, are you? But, yeah, my wife never eats a cooked breakfast, but if we go somewhere, she'll always have it.
I saw the most extraordinary thing the other day. There was a Frenchman sitting in the hotel where I was, and he had a plate of bacon, and a couple of boiled eggs turns up, and he breaks open the boiled eggs and scoops them on top of the bacon and eats them. And I said, why are you doing that? And he said, oh, this is what I like.
I'll tell you what, that's a very rare thing to see a Frenchman who understands a good English breakfast. Because you go to the continent, and not just, many great things about the continent. Breakfast ain't one of them. I mean, we could not have built an empire on croissants and rubbish pastries. This is empire-building ballads stuff.
The Battle of Waterloo was won over a plate of bacon and eggs. It probably was.
It was. Can you imagine? Going to war on a croissant. That's why they always lost, I think, to be honest. Is the good old pig and egg. I mean, pig is the key to a good breakfast, isn't it?
What do you think influences people's choice of breakfasts?
Sadly, these days, time. I mean, everybody is in a rush in the morning for various reasons. They're rushing to work, they're rushing to the children's school, they're rushing to everything. It's just quick, rush. When I give the children boiled eggs, you know, I'm rather rushing them through, whereas you wouldn't do that at dinner. So therefore, going back to the big, full English breakfast, it is a treat, because you need time to cook it, to eat it, dare I say, to digest it as well. We spend 3 hours over dinner. Why not spend a bit of time over breakfast?
Breakfast cereals have been around for more than 100 years, but I prefer our older cook traditions, although maybe not so la la Colbert. Like all good food, a good breakfast comes at a cost. And, as much as anything, the real cost these days is time, which is perhaps why we mostly restrict our morning indulgences to when someone else is doing the cooking. Next week, I'll be looking at lunch, a meal that 300 years ago didn't even exist, but which has been adapting to the changes in our working lives ever since.
And the glorious food season continues here on BBC4 with Michelle Roux's profile of Escoffier in the first MasterChef at 9 on Monday. And that's followed by the chef who conquered New York. Meet Paul Leibrant on Monday at 10. Next, though, brand new comedy coming up with Getting On.